done. One simple example I will show you how we can manage that. So that is MVC framework. Sometimes we also use MVVM framework depending on situation. In MVVM framework, so we have data in model, and we have a view model, and we have view model and view. Actually, so view contains the UI, and the interaction related logic is also present in UI only. There is no separate controller. Now directly it can handle interaction with the data and get the data and use the data. You don't need a separate controller. All the logic is defined in the view level only. We call this approach as MVVM. Now it depends which one we have to use. That depends on requirement. That means what is advantage of MVC is clean separation of logic, data, and presentation. We can easily test them. So, and all the processing happens at the compiler level. And finally, the view is rendered to client. That means it will be faster also. So, but one problem is in this kind of architecture, every request need to be processed in the controller. You make a request, then again it goes to compiler, process it, compiles it, generates output and sends back. Every time interaction is managed by a controller. View model advantage is the logic is in the UI only. Directly you can handle all interactions from UI. Then what is good is, so the good is that it will be so faster in communication, but will be slow in rendering the output. Why it will be slow in rendering the output? What is the cause? Why it will be slow in rendering the output? Because it will be slow in rendering the output because page becomes heavy if all the logic and UI is present. Initial load will be fast, but after that the rendering of content will be slowed down. It will slow down because we have a lot of content here, So a lot of logic need to be processed in the UI itself. Then it becomes difficult and makes the UI heavy. So depending on situation, and it is difficult for testing, extensibility, it is difficult. But how to use this? How it is very simple. Let's observe this. For that, I created a Bootstrap with data binding. In index.html, we will start with data binding. In index.html, we will start with the data binding. So data binding, we will start with the data binding. Okay. Now, generally, once you do this, okay. Now, let's start the project once. And here, ng saru. So hyphen, and we have open. We are starting the application. Acha, we are not in the project. Where is the project? Our full stack project is there. Amazon, huh? Right? So it is CD Amazon. So it is in CD Angular projects. In that CD shopping. And in that we are configuring ng serve open. Okay. We need to compile from the project location. Okay. So now it is working fine. Let's create a UI here. So let's go to the data binding component. In the data binding component, HTML. In the data binding component HTML, we are designing. So let's keep a div. Okay. You can use your Bootstrap in Angular. You can install Bootstrap and you can use Bootstrap library in your Angular. Initially, I'm just using a basic data list. How to use Bootstrap, I will just show you. Data term, and here we defined, so just keep a heading. Here say register product. And here we are defining the data term and configuring it. So this is a name and data definition, a text box. Input type is equal to text. Okay. Now another data term, price. And data definition, input type is equal to text. Okay. Now we need to access the data and display the data coming from this text boxes. So text boxes, or you can have a drop down, suppose, and here data definition. So select, and here we are configuring an option and so some Delhi, Hyderabad. Okay. That means various controls, how they are handled. Another data term is some stock. A definition, this is checkbox. Input type is equal to checkbox. And so stock available. Okay, that's the option we are configuring. Now let's save this here. We are configuring that, fine. Now details entered, we need to get them and display. Whatever the details they are entering, the UI is ready. So that means the design is ready. And whatever details they entered in those text boxes, we need to get them. You already know how we can do that in JavaScript and jQuery. We already know how do we do that in JavaScript and jQuery. Get element by ID, name, tag names, and all these. We need to use a lot of DOM manipulation. Now here, I will just keep a heading, details. And I want to display these product details below. Details below. What whatever they are entering side by side anywhere. Earlier, we need to use lot of now in the view level, in the UI only. And for that, Angular provides to keep the data and manage the data. Angular provides a dynamic model. Model is created by using ng model. So ng model. ng model is used to configure the model. ng model is used to configure and define the model. It is used for configuring and defining the model. ng model creates a memory reference where you can store the values of the control and you can use the value. This ng model is not directly available. You have to get it from forms module. You have to get it from forms module. And this forms module is present in a library, Angular Forms library. It is present in Angular Forms library. So usually now we need here ng model and forms module, and that is derived from Angular Forms. First, we need to import this module into the project. So where to import the modules, I told you, we have to go to app modules. In the app modules, you have two options, declarations and imports. Declaration is the location where generally declaration is the location where you configure. In the declarations, you configure. Technically, you configure the components, services, and pipes. Imports is the location where you configure the modules. Modules are configured in this imports. So here you have to import a forms module. And from Angular Forms, you have to import that forms module. It will get it from the Angular Forms. So it will import the forms module from Angular Forms. Once it is configured, so in the forms module, right? And once it is defined in the forms module. Now what we need to do is, so we can use this ng model through this forms module. Your application can use. Once you import here, you can use anywhere in the application. Okay, let's go here. Now, the point is very simple. Now this text box related value, you need to collect and store in a model reference. Then for this control, we have to simply define first a name. Because as per the rules, without name, an element cannot be identified. You already know that in HTML, element should have a name in order to submit its value. Element must be defined. So with this value. ng model is not controller, it is like model, right? ng model is model, it's not controller. Huh? We are discussing about MVVM architecture now, right? This is MVVM architecture where you will not have any controller, huh? Right? So ng model is not controller. ng model is referring to model, the location where you store the data, right? That means now here the model is, all these controls are models. That means we need to collect the data from all these controls. And as per the rules of HTML, the value of any element cannot be submitted if it is not having a name. Every element should have a name. So what we do is, here we can simply define the name. So that means you can configure the name as some txt name. Okay. Now after that, now whatever value entered inside it, it should be stored in a model. So first we need to configure a model, ng model. Okay. In this, that means now memory is allocated for this text box. Okay. What is the memory reference name in the model? Memory reference name, this name attribute, the name attribute is only HTML attribute. It is not a dynamic attribute. That means, so this is just a name, and we need to store the value of this text box in memory. So for that we defined ng model. Ng model will allocate memory, and for that memory, what reference name you want to give, you have to define with hash. Hash, the reference name for text box is txt name. So it's very important that here, what is name and what is this txt name? Name is for HTML, txt name is Angular dynamically allocates memory, and the memory is referred as txt name, and this txt name is allocated into the model, ng model. That means first a memory is allocated for text box through ng model. After allocating memory for that text box, a reference name is given in the model, and reference name is txt name. That means txt name is the variable. In that variable, whatever value you stored in the model of this particular text box, that value will be accessed. That means the value of text box can be accessed and stored in this txt name. Txt name. So the same you have to do for all controls now. So let's see one more time. For the price text box, first, HTML will not submit its value without name. So for HTML, we have to give a name, some txt price. Second, memory need to be allocated for this price. So ng model will allocate memory. It makes it dynamic. And after that, we need to create a reference name, txt price is equal to, so ng model, it will store in that reference. That means in the model, a reference will be created by txt name, and in that reference, the value of text box will be stored. The same you have to do for other controls also. For a drop down, so I need to configure the drop down. So here we need to define. So as first name, LST city, LST cities, then ng model and hash LST cities is equal to ng model. Okay, same for checkbox. Now this is ng model, and hash opt stock is equal to ng model. Generally, what is going to store in that? Checkboxes will store Boolean value, true, false. Checkboxes will store Boolean value, true, false. And these text boxes, drop downs and all, they store the value you have entered. Now below that, the product details need to be displayed. So below that, the product details need to be displayed. So we need to display the product details below that. Then how to access them and use them? It's very simple. So here we need to create, we are creating a table, just a border. Okay. And in the table we have t-head, and tr and th. And here we are defining some, or we will do one thing directly, we will keep a row. So t body, and we will keep tr in that first cell name. right side, I need to get the name and display. It's very simple. You need to use a binding expression. And here we need to access the model reference txt name dot value. That's it. It gets the value. So we don't need to use any DOM manipulations. Get element by ID, get element by tag names, nothing. Just you need to use the model reference. And similarly, we have another cell. So price. And here we are defining. So price. Here we are configuring txt price dot value. Now another, we have shipped to, and we need to get from so another cell. This is TD, okay. And we need to get it from get it from the reference, and we need to store. So lst cities dot value. That's it. And one more option here. Here it is stock. We can write an expression, directly expression, like you can put a parenthesis and you can say OPT stock, OPT stock. So that is OPT stock. Okay, right. If OPT stock dot value is equal to true, that means if checkbox will return true, then question mark, we want to print available. Otherwise, we need to display out of stock. We need to configure that. We need to define this. Now let's run this and see. So let's configure and run this and see. Now you can see that. So here the data coming from that. So name, price, and all we are defining. All I kept as cells. Better you can keep separate row for everyone, right? So that means this is in a separate row, that is in a separate row. Just I am using this in one location, and you see here I am entering name. So some Samsung TV. It will get the name and display the name there. I am entering the price, and it will get the price and display the price. I am selecting shipped to, and it will get that shipped to. And stock, so out of stock or available, it will display the details when I am selecting. So we are accessing the data and displaying it. I will keep it simple. So I will keep it simple. So table row and another row, in that these two details. And this is a row and these two details, and this is another row with those details. Okay. So now this looks little simple in the presentation. So you can see the content will be like this. And here you are defining the values, and it will get the values and it will display the values. This we are managing without writing much logic. Here everything is through presentation. Everything is through presentation. It uses a framework. Everything you have done in the UI. Everything you have done in the UI. You configured everything in the UI. And you are accessing from the UI. So that means all the configuration and the logic is done in the view only, UI only. There is no logic written anywhere inside this TS file. It is empty, nothing is written. Means related to our manipulations, nothing is configured. Everything happens in the view. That means the view comprises of the presentation and the logic for interacting with the UI. Everything is configured inside this. So this is actually the concept of MVVM architecture. That means we are not writing any event. Events also we can write, but currently whenever a value changed in text box, that is updated. Whenever value changed in drop down, it is updated. So we can simply handle the interactions in the view. This is how the data binding works using MVVM framework. Using the MVVM architecture, how it is going to handle the interaction. MVVM architecture, how it is going to manage that. So this is MVVM. So here no controller role here. So we have model. Model is memory. Model is memory where you have the data, and you are accessing the data, storing the data in the model, and you are accessing the data from the UI itself. So this is MVVM framework. This is MVVM framework. So there is no controller related options. How to handle events, I will tell you. Events, how do we handle? So just an example I will give here. So this is an example of MVVM architecture. For that, a few points you need to know what to do one by one. First step. So you have to go to, so we need to go to app.module.ts. And here imports. So you have to import forms module. You have to import the forms module. So this forms module is present in the forms module is present in Angular Forms. It will automatically add. Otherwise, we need to manually add that at the top. That means we have to say import forms module. So and from, so that is Angular/forms library. We need to configure that. So this is the basic approach how we need to define. Now after that, that means now it is ready to use the model and all. Now you add a new component. So we add ng generate component data binding. That is the component. Okay. Now everything is designed in the UI only. So we have to just go to data binding dot component dot html. Everything is managed in this HTML only. Everything is managed in that HTML only. So all the logic is defined here. In the HTML, we are configuring entire presentation and design. And you can see everything is managed here. And I will just paste that. So everything is defined here. This is MVVM. That means there is no controller. Controller means what? Controller means the TS file. This is where we manage the majority of actions. This is called controller. So you can handle through MVVM architecture or MVC architecture depending on situation. How the same works with the MVVM architecture that you have seen, the same works with MVC, we will see now. Now, when you are dealing with MVC architecture, observe here. So I will go to the HTML. I will remove all these options here. Only input type text box. Input type text box. And here also input type text box. So input type is equal to text. Rest of others I am removing. Just price text box and name text box. And drop down also just drop down. Okay. And checkbox also just input type check. Okay. Now we are not configuring any reference model or anything here. We are not configuring anything here. And in the design also, we will keep this empty. So we will keep this empty. We are keeping that empty in the design. Now how the two-way binding works. So that means how the model logic works. So here, how the model logic works. Let's see. One simple example here is, Let's go to the component TS file, the component TS file. The component TS file is, this is the logic. Here you need to create the properties for every text box. Suppose txt name. Okay. So that is txt name is a property configured here. And it is empty. We are not defining any name or configuration here. Generally, as per the TypeScript rules, you can put some value text empty. Txt name is currently empty. So we have txt price, that is also empty. Or just we will keep this as 0, that is for name, right? And here we have lst city. LST city is also empty. It is also empty. Nothing is defined. And we have OPT stock, that is for stock. That is by default false or true. We are keeping some option here. So these are the properties that we define. Now these need to be binded. These to be binded with these controls. Binded with these controls. Just very simple. To bind the properties to this control, we have to use a square brace. This is called property binding. This is property binding. And here we need to create a model, ng model. Into that model, we need to keep this txt name. That's it. That means whatever present in text box, it will be stored in model. And the value of text box will first go into this reference and it will store there. It will go and reference and store there. That you can access and display wherever you want. Similarly, I need to attach the model for others. So ng model. ng model, I need to define txt price. Okay. And a drop down here, ng model, we need to define. So that is LST city. And here we need to define ng model, that is OPT stock. That's it. So now whatever the values you are entering, these values will be sent into these references. Those we can display and we can use in the presentation. So here we have to just use txt name. It is a property. So txt price, it is a property. And LST city is a property. And here logic. So OPT stock is equal to true. Then display the term as available or display as out of stock. Like this, we need to configure that. We need to configure. Now that is the basic approach how we are defining and handling it. Now it's ready. Now you can see in the design. Now I am entering the name and I'm entering the price and I'm entering shipped to. Here some issues are there here. So the issue is nothing but, so see, observe here. By default, what you mentioned in the logic, it is accessing and displaying here. So in the console, whatever you are typing here, so that is from the text box, the property here, it is not able to display that. So that txt price, txt name, it is unable to handle that, right? So here, observe carefully. When you define this value, so ng model is referred as a model. Here one more approach is there. Approach is when you make any change in this, it should update back to the txt name. That means actually it should use an event binding technique. First point, through property binding technique, it can get the value and display the value. That means, for example, see now, observe carefully. Name is suppose TV. City is some Hyderabad. And observe carefully when I define that. So those values need to be binded into these text boxes. You see it is text binded. Price I defined some 0 and you see they are binded. That is working fine. But one more what we need to do is when user make any change, I need to update it. Then how you identify change occurred inside the text box. So that is identified by a event binding technique, and event is written with a parenthesis. That means now the ng model through property binding, it is getting the value and displaying, and this parenthesis is event binding, and by default it uses change event. You can write different events, click event and all we can write. I will show you. By default event is change. On change event, this value will be updated back. This is a two-way binding. That means we are getting the value and we are updating the value. And observe only name is doing it. Okay, now see here. I remove that name and I type here, then it is working fine. It is updating back. That means actually this symbol indicates, so this is property binding. That means it gets the value from property and binds. This indicates event binding. That means it will identify the change and update the change back. And model is using both property binding and event binding. ng model is using both. Through property binding, it will get, remember, first property, then event. So that means you cannot write like this. You cannot write like this. First property should be binded, then event. Now, if you do the same, others are not working. I changing the price, it's not working because two-way binding is not defined. That means now again on event, it has to get that and update. So on event, that means on change, it should update back. On change, it should update back. This is property and event binding technique. Now, when you see this, and you can see here, when I am typing some name, some Samsung TV, it is updated. Some price, so the price is updated. Some city, it is updated. And in stock, available or out of stock, it is updated. So this is a simple technique. So we don't need to write much logic and all. So whatever the data is present, it brings the data and handles the data. But for that, controller is playing the role. Here data comes from here and data goes and stores here. This we have to access and display. So from view, data goes to controller. From controller, the data gets into the model. From model, again gets to controller. From controller, again it gets to the view. This is MVC architecture. In MVVM architecture, we don't need to configure anything in the controller. But in MVC architecture, we need to do that. So MVC architecture, we need to configure that. So this is an example how it handles with the MVC architecture. This is an example for MVC, how it handles MVC. Just same, we have to go to data binding dot component.ts. In the TypeScript file, we need to add these properties, only those properties. I'm just giving you all the code. And another, we have data binding dot component.html. In the HTML, we can configure this and display. That means only slight change here. So we are just using the property and event binding technique for accessing and displaying it. So that means model uses two techniques. So the square brace, this indicates this is property binding. And the parenthesis, this indicates event binding. So these are the options it uses for managing the interaction. Now, here we are not using any DOM manipulations or all. Get element by ID, get element by tag name. We are not using anything. Just we are managing all the interactions in this way, configuring all the interactions in this way. Now, the key point is how events are managed now. That means I don't want immediately to update. On button click, it should update. On drop down change, it should update. So how events are managed, how we can design the same examples of our JavaScript jQuery here without much logic. We will see one simple example for that we'll see in our next session, right? So in the next session, we will discuss about how do we manage and how do we handle the interactions. So with event binding in Angular, then we will learn how to consume API and present the API, right? That we will discuss in the next session, right? So next session. So, and next session will be again on Monday, right? Tomorrow, no session. Again, we will do on Monday. Okay.